under the British, for example, things like crocodiles were in the same sort of boat as tigers and leopards and hyenas, all vermin. And shoot them, just get rid of them. They are a danger to human life. They are no use to anybody. Kill them. So this persisted for decades, if not hundreds of years. So I was lucky to go to the Bombay Natural History Society, Asiatic Society, other places to find the old literature, the books and the records written about the status of animals. So I would read things like the river banks are covered with crocodiles, both the long-snouted and the short-snouted varieties, referring to gharial and mother, of course. And reports from the Sundarbans, for example. The Sundarbans is just crawling with saltwater crocodiles. So these are all the old reports of the 1800s and the early 1900s. My surveys were only in the 1970s. That's many, many years later, 70, 80 years after these reports. And what I found was totally shocker, Besides the crocodiles had disappeared, the river had changed like mad, because by that time, dam projects were coming in a big way, and rivers were changing. Forests had been absolutely devastated, again, thanks to the British and later on our own department. And so, changing natural forests to monocultures and stuff had all this disastrous effect. So crocodiles were really on the brink. We couldn't estimate more than 200 gharial in 1973, after we did our surveys. 200 gharial left. I mean, that is literally on the brink. So luckily, at that time, the Prime Minister, Mrs. Gandhi, was interested in wildlife, and she even had a thing for crocodiles as well, and snakes. I mean, I couldn't believe it, but she was quite empathetic toward these things. And when we met her later on in Madras, when she came to the snake parks, we had wonderful discussions with her about how crocodiles and so on need protection. And by that time, they had called a crocodile expert from, he was then in Australia, Dr. Robert Bustard. And he started something through the Food and Agriculture Organization. And Mrs. Gandhi called it Project Crocodile, just the way Project Tiger was made. So I was totally flabbergasted. I said, wow, this is incredible. We're now getting the sort of status that tigers get. And I found out a very beautiful paper written by a guy called Hugh Cott in Africa. And it was all about the Nile crocodile and how, where their numbers are fairly stable, the fisheries is very good. And they're catching a lot of the Nile perch and the species of fish which are commercially valuable. Because, and I didn't notice, in fact, they killed a lot of crocodiles in those days, but this guy was a scientist. So any crocodile that was killed, he said, "Now I want to look at the stomach contents." And he was found that the majority of fish that they were eating were catfish. And then we started researching catfish a little bit and found out that they're like vacuum cleaners. When you have a whole shoal of baby fish or something, they just suck them all in. Or even the eggs, the ova of other fish when they're breeding, including frogs and toads, they'll just swallow it all. So catfish were really a danger to fisheries, and crocodiles were feeding on the catfish. So suddenly, crocodiles become a very valuable component of the ecosystem. So we use this argument when we are talking to people. They say, so what use are crocodiles? And that is really one of the prime values of crocodiles. Look at India as a whole, on a landscape level, as people like to say. We have still every predator that we had 1 million years ago. All the major predators are still here. Which country can say that in the world? But the big gharial initiative was in Uttar Pradesh, and it was one of our guys, Dhruvajyoti Basu, who worked at the snake park and then later on joined the UP Forest Department, who collected the first batch of eggs from Katarnia Ghat, which is up near the Nepal border. brought them back to Kukrail in UP, near Lucknow, and hatched the eggs out in captivity and started the release program. This went on for years and years, and thousands of gharial were released back to the wild, largely in the Chambal River, and then some other rivers as well, the Mahanadi in Odisha and other places. But it was amazingly successful. But it was based on the same stuff that we had been doing with mugger all those years. It worked beautifully, and the gharial went from just a few hundred left in the wild up to now thousands of gharials in the wild right now. I don't think I have to plan my legacy. I've already sort of set the ball rolling. And I think I don't really have to say much, because a lot of the young people who are interested in these things are doing them as we speak. And, we've got a lot of graduates from the Croc Bank, from the Snake Park, from our other field stations. And they're all doing wonderful work. So that's my legacy. I don't know how many times I've walked on this path going fishing in the lake, but I have very rarely seen snakes when I'm walking. But when you see them is when you're sitting down fishing by the lake and you're quiet and you're not threatening anything. And it was wonderful. One day while I was sitting there, I heard a squirrel alarm call, a particular alarm call that squirrels have when they see a snake. So I looked very carefully, and sure enough, there was a cobra going right below him, and he was looking at the snake. But interestingly, the cobra was heading straight toward me. He swam across part of the pond there, came right up the bank, and I just froze. I didn't even move my head. I just looked with my eyes. And it was wonderful, because here, a nice big adult, looked like a male cobra, came right down below my feet, which I had chappals on, right next to my bare feet, and just went off. He didn't look twice at me, never spread a hood, obviously didn't even have a clue I was sitting there. If I had gone like that or something, he would have definitely stood up and spread his hood. So yeah, you see snakes sometimes, but not as often as you think. There are plenty around, but they stay hidden. They know you're around, they want to stay hidden.
So now this topic brings us to a very interesting thing, is about snake bites. 50,000 deaths, you've said, happen in India because of snake bite. What are the primary reasons for that, and how can we avoid that?
Yeah, that's a very good question. It's the kind of question we've been trying to tell people about for decades. Yeah, in 1977, we set up, along with the Madras Medical College, probably one of the first snakebite conferences in India. I'm not sure if there was one before that, but 77 we had one in Madras. And basically we had the local minister for health and stuff like that. A lot of very top doctors and all were there. So we started talking about it, but it's interesting, we're talking about the same things. How many years later, 40 odd years later, we're still talking about the problem of snake bite. It's basically what we talked about earlier. The numbers of snakes in agricultural areas is just phenomenal because of the rodent population. And people, there are people working in rice fields, they don't wear boots. They go barefoot, and it just makes a lot of sense. If you've ever tried to wear boots in a rice paddy, you'll know what I'm talking about. It'll get full of water, it'll be a big mess. And also people have a respect for their land. They say, we don't wear shoes walking on our land. I mean, even when people criticize them and say, you have to wear shoes, sorry, we don't wear shoes. This is our land, we have respect for our land, and we don't wear shoes. We go barefoot. Okay, it's like going into someone's house or into a temple. So how do you solve this problem? But basically our big theme now in our snakebite mitigation program, which we're doing very intensively now, is to get people to be aware of where they're walking, when they're walking. Because snakes are active at certain periods of time. We're teaching people that when snakes are most likely to be active. At night, you definitely use a torch. And people say, yeah, but the pump house, it's only 100 meters and I've been doing it every night for 25 years. Yeah, but the 25 years, during that period of time, maybe a snake wasn't crossing, but it may be tomorrow night. And sure enough, it does happen that way. And we interviewed quite a few people in Kerala, for example, 12 people in a row who'd been bitten by Russell's vipers, and we interviewed them how it happened. Invariably, it was because they didn't have a light at night, invariably. Including a little girl who said, yeah, every evening at 6:30 or 7, when it's just getting dark, I run across to my friend's house to watch TV because we don't have a TV. Well, she ran across to watch TV and ran right on a Russell's Viper. She almost had to have her leg amputated. It's because if she had just had a torch, she would have been fine. But yeah, so it's not easy teaching people to change their habits. But if they want to avoid snakebite, they've got to do it. We're trying to tell people look at me as a total freak, okay? You like snakes. You must be crazy. Okay, it's very easy for me to like snakes. I know how to deal with it. I'm aware of it. I know if I got bitten, I could get to a hospital or whatever. But the point is, if we want to get people to at least be a little neutral about snakes instead of stark, raving fear, we've got to get some way of making sure that if they're bitten by a snake, there is a treatment for it, adequate treatment and fast enough. And of course teach them to avoid being bitten in the first place. So that's the whole reason why we're doing all this, is to get people to change their attitude towards snakes.
At the Madras Crocodile Bank, and
yeah,
how you have worked with, what is so fascinating about the Arulas, if I were to ask you first?
Well, probably for me, we have to go back to the 1960s, to 68, 69. And I was new back in India. I had been out of India for 6 years already. And when I came back, as a filmmaker, you might want to have a peer group so you can share stories and have a good time with. Well, I was a snake guy and I wanted a peer group too. But where are they? Where are the snake people around? So 1968, I was given the opportunity of meeting Arulas after having read a piece in the newspaper, Indian Express, by a guy called Harry Miller. And he was what you could call a displaced Welshman who came to Pakistan first and worked for one of the newspapers there, and then came to India, the late 60s, mid to late 60s, and was the chief photographer at Indian Express in Madras. So he wrote about the Arulas, and I saw this is great, fantastic. And he introduced me to a couple of Arulas, and I went out with them.
So that started the partnership with...
Yeah, that's how it began, but as you can imagine, that set my imagination going, what more I could learn from them.
Yeah.
And that's why I became very conscious of the whole tribal situation in India and the fact that most tribes are on their way out in terms of their old beliefs and their old skills and stuff. They have no reason to use them anymore. They're all going for other jobs. The youth in the tribal communities are primarily wanting to join the mainstream, and they don't, they feel looked down upon, and they want to get out of that mode. And also the Wildlife Act came in, and the Forest Department shut down the capture of snakes for skins and all. And that's, of course, as you probably know, what began our effort to make an Irula Snake Catchers Cooperative, which I like to call the Venom Cooperative, because it's primarily for catching snakes, extracting the venom, and releasing the snakes back to the wild. 1978 we're talking about. That's a long time ago. It started then. We started supplying venoms to the various companies. First it was Hafkin Institute, almost solely producing antivenom. And now it's 7 or 8 companies, and they're all buying venom from the Irula Cooperative. How many years later? And it's wonderful. The Irulas are saving lakhs of lives, and they are more or less unaware of it. I mean,
and they have also found a livelihood in that sense.
Yeah, exactly. This is the important thing. I mean, they've got a livelihood, and they're still doing what they traditionally used to do, which they would otherwise not be allowed to do because of the Wildlife Act.
And you took the Irulas to Florida as well.
That's the irony of it, isn't it? Because, yeah, when I heard about, I spent a couple of years in Florida goofing around in the Everglades, in the swamps there, and I got ready to fall in love with the place, and the snakes, of course. And then I heard about the python invasion, that a hurricane blew off a whole bunch of baby pythons from a pet shop and scattered them around the Everglades, and people would keep pythons as pets, and then they just let them go in the Everglades. And suddenly they just started breeding like mad. It was python paradise. I went to Katrania Ghat in northern UP next to the Nepal border, and it was all similar, grassy, swampy area, and we found lots of pythons there. It really clicked. I said, man, we've brought these snakes from India and put them over there, and obviously not on purpose, but they just love it, and they're breeding by the thousands. And at the same time, I realized that the Irla's fathers and grandfathers had been responsible for almost decimating the entire python population in Tamil Nadu. So I talked with a guy called Frank Mazzotti, Dr. Frank Mazzotti. He's a professor at the University of Florida. I said, what do you think of this idea? These guys whose families, whose fathers and grandfathers wiped out the pythons in Tamil Nadu, what if they come over and show you guys, you python catchers, how it's really done? I was able to talk that way to him because he's a nice guy. They said, that sounds like a very interesting proposition. This was in 2007 or something like that. Well, it took us 10 years to 2017, but we convinced the Florida Fish and Wildlife Service to fund us, Janaki and myself, as interpreters and technicians, with 2 Irlas, just 2 Irlas, who were expert snake catchers, but they had never caught a python, never, but they knew how to find snakes. So we went over there and we had the rest of it's history. We had a blast. We caught a lot of pythons, some huge ones.
So how have you set this home and, the field, the camera traps, also the leopard and everything?
Yeah, I told you earlier that when we first got here, this plot of land was completely covered with forest. So I put a camera trap, and every night we were getting civet cats and toddy cats and stuff like that. And then within a week, I brought the camera trap back and looked at, and I was just amazed to see this wonderful. I can send you a video of that actually. It's just a short clip, but it's fantastic adult male leopard walking straight to the camera. And actually, I was just as pleased with myself of putting the camera in the right place. I said, wow, I'm a pro. So yeah, getting camera trap pictures right is a bit of a technique which you have to learn. There are some great geniuses in that field. A couple of guys with National Geographic who just do incredible camera trap stuff. But yeah, that kind of sealed for us the fact that this was the right place to live. I mean, it's still it's right next to a village. We've got the loudspeakers from the tractor and from the temple. Sometimes, not all the time. Mm-hmm. But the fact is, wildlife is still here. There's plenty of birds here. We've got birds nesting all around us. So it's a wonderful place.
In the first part of the autobiography that is already available, where you speak about the first time, the kind of the excitement that you got while the milk snake and the snakes. You still feel that way when you see a snake?
Most definitely. I haven't changed at all in that sense. Despite
handling so many thousands and possibly hundreds of thousands.
Just every snake, and every time I see it is a new experience for me. I'm still in great wonderment of what the hell are they thinking. And snakes are, creatures from outer space. They're not anything like any of the other animals we know about. I mean, other reptiles, lizards and crocodiles, they can hear. They have eyes which blink and look at you, and their heads move around. Snake, totally mysterious. I mean, we still don't know what the hell is going on in their brains. We know a little bit more about it now that we've studied them using radio telemetry and following them around and handling thousands of them. But they're still a great mystery, and that's probably what keeps me going.
Now that you are in the land of India, where we believe in rebirths and all, if you were to be reborn, which snake would you be?
I don't know. It would be a snake which is not anywhere near human beings. I can tell you that.